All right, here we go again. So, Gestalt group therapy is actually more famous and made more readily available through the pollsters, not Fritz Perls. So, Fritz Perls really was not for groups. He liked that individual one on one confrontation. But Irving and Miriam Poolster are really the ones who are credited with bringing Gestalt into group work. Now, a lot of you know that I often like to find out if people are still alive. So Miriam she passed in '01, but Irving, I Googled, is still living. He's quite old at this point. So anyway, little fun fact. In fact, okay, so let me say that I Googled him last week. So last I checked, he was still alive. But just remember also, Gestalt therapy was developed by Fritz Perls and his wife Laura. She didn't get a ton of credit in the 1940s. Okay? It is existential and it's grounded in the here and now and focuses on existential dialogue. So we're going to scroll ahead here. I said this already, existential phenomenological approach. Fritz emphasized that one-to-one work to use the hot seat style, that confrontation style in front of the group, in front of more of an audience. He was more of an audience guy, okay? not within groups, but in front of a group. So get that distinguishing factor down. Contemporary Gestalt practice in the US is called relational Gestalt therapy because, as we know from person-centered, all the research has shown that those relational qualities, those core conditions, are extremely important for us in therapy. So Gestalt has added that into their new contemporary practice. Now, one of the basic goals of Gestalt therapy is to increase what they call as awareness. And so we know that as self-awareness, self-actualization, but being completely more aware of who you are, that you're responsible for you, what your environment is like, how you interact with your environment, and being able to accept yourself. The ability to make what they call is contact. And remember, contact for Gestalt means something different. And you may remember this from last semester, but it means fully interacting with nature and with other people without losing your sense of individuality. If you're not losing yourself, you think about boundaries and you think about people who are people pleasers. This is a good example. They lose themselves in trying to achieve being liked and accepted by others. This you achieve your own individuation and you're able to have boundaries basically. So this more current terms, boundaries, good boundaries, really self-aware and having that good contact with others, or healthy boundaries if you will. Not analysis like Freud, but the integration of different conflicting dimensions of yourself. We've talked about this a lot, and you know that I do parts work. And so if you think about it this way, and I do agree that this is really relevant, we all have different parts of our personalities, and the more trauma and more adverse experiences that we have, the more separated those are. So being able to integrate all the conflicting parts of ourselves and be whole and be fully aware and okay with ourselves is the optimum level of health. So I believe that is an easier way to explain what he means there for you. And personal change in Gestalt therapy, and this is the same vein that we were just talking about, is when you are really aware of what you are and who you are, and that's back to that awareness. We just mentioned that, instead of what we are not. So who we are, personal acceptance, and loving and accepting who we are, as opposed to trying to be what we are not. In addition to that, personal change tends to occur when we become aware of what we are as opposed to trying to be what we are not, is also the paradoxical theory of change. A definition will probably come about later on, but just so you know, that is what that is in your text if you want to know more about that on 294. So it's important we accept who and what we are rather than striving to be what we should be. And in a Gestalt group, it's both the process and the content that are important. Gestalt is very nonverbal. Gestalt is really looking for those underlying things coming to the surface through nonverbal behavior. And that would be in the interactions between group members. And that's that deeper process versus just content, which is direct content like I'm giving you right now in this lecture that I hope you're listening to, for heaven's sakes. Okay. Those principles of Gestalt, and again, great review for all of you for your NCE and for your CPCE. This is a second overview of theory and should really hammer home these ideas for you and also help you to develop what theory you're thinking about for your practice when you get into practicum in the fall. So when we get to these four concepts of Gestalt therapy, holism, field theory, the figure formation process, and organismic self-regulation, a lot of times students get confused because the type of words that are used in this theory can be quite confusing. But holism is really what we just talked about. We all have parts. So to help you understand, there is the student part of you, the worker, the child part, the parent part, whoever is listening. And those are different parts of you. We also have different emotional parts, and so how do you work together wholly, and are you working together as a whole person? As a Gestalt therapist, you would attend to the thoughts, the feelings, the behaviors, the body, the dreams, the whole person, every aspect of the person, and see how everything fits together and how that person interacts with their environment, with others, and that's the contact that I referenced earlier in my lecture. Next is field theory. As a therapist for field theory, you're really wanting to know how this individual interacts with their environment or their field. Everything's relational, everything's related. So you want to see what's occurring at the boundaries between the person and their environment. Again, the boundaries I mentioned earlier is going to be much easier for you to understand it that way, I think. But how is this person, how are they in group? How do their peers see them? How do you see them? How do you feel about them? Are you annoyed when they get there? Or do you like them? Do you see them agreeing with everyone? Are they trying to save everyone? How do they interact? How do are others off put by them? How do they interact in that group? It's a microcosm, a small subset of what's happening to them in their larger scale world. So field theory. And then we have the figure formation process. The figure formation really is about your environment, and what kind of comes to the forefront is the main figure or issue that you're paying attention to, our client is paying attention to. It's intertwined with the organismic self-regulation. So it's really important to try to understand those two concepts together. And if you're reading through the text, make sure you read them both so that you understand them. So, for instance, if you're in a group and your balance is disturbed, by some kind of need, an interest, you will try to do what you need to gratify the need. We try to do our best to regulate ourselves, but we often don't have the ability to do that, and clients don't have the ability to do that. And we take action and we try to get our balance back. And you can see this play out in group, and you would recognize it as the figure that has come to the forefront. A much easier way for me to describe this to you is what I do in internal family systems theory with the different parts of personalities. Um, Exiles, firefighters, and managers. And people with trauma, and really everyone, they have managers parts who manage their personality, and they have exiled emotions that they exiled off they don't want to feel. So that might be shame. If you ever watch Brene Brown, she talks a lot about shame and how that's a universal feeling. In fact, we all feel shame. And if you don't, you're a psychopath. But anyway, so shame is a universal feeling. And how do you combat shame? You combat it through vulnerability. And that was her work. And it's the power of vulnerability. I showed it to you in Foundations. So when you think about it that way, we don't like to feel vulnerable. In fact, we think of that negatively a lot. So let's say vulnerability is an exiled emotion. You start to feel vulnerable. It scares you. It upsets the apple cart. The manager doesn't like it. The manager keeps things in line. They keep you, if you're a perfectionist, the manager is the perfectionistic part of your personality. And the reason you're a perfectionist is you don't like to be vulnerable or any of those emotions, like anything, room for failure or doubt. And so if you start to feel that way, then another part of your personality can come out, which is firefighter. And that firefighter will try to put the exile part of your personality back on the island at whatever cost to return the personality to equilibrium where the manager is in charge. I hope that made more sense to you. Because if a figure comes to the foreground, what is that feeling? It could be vulnerability. It could be the figure. It could be the person that triggered them in the group. So your other text does a better job of explaining this. So you want to go back to that and take a peek at your theories book. It'll help you understand that better. If I didn't do it justice in here, you can ask me tomorrow. All right, and then next, we're moving on to awareness, and then we'll talk about the here and now. I've already mentioned awareness. In a Gestalt group, the awareness is the what and how, not necessarily the why. You're attending to the moment-to-moment continuum of awareness in the group, so the members can discover how they act in life and that microcosm of the group that you've created. You see how they function in the world. Nothing exists except the here and now. The past is gone, the future has not yet arrived. This is Gestalt. Although I was talking about something a little bit different a minute ago, if you can understand how this works in the here and the now, it's playing out in the here and now in that group. We tend to reenact past problems as if they were occurring now in a group. So this is what you're looking for and attending to as a group leader. You would ask questions like, what are you experiencing right now? What is going on inside of you as you're speaking? How are you experiencing anxiety in your body? How are you attempting to withdraw? How are you avoiding contact with unpleasant feelings? What's your feeling at this moment as you sit there and try to talk? What do you hear in your voice as you talk to your father now? You may have heard my voice change just then when I asked those questions. It's because I want you to know you can ask those questions in a very empathic, person-centered way. Tell me what you're experiencing right in this moment. If I talked to you and said that to you in that manner, it probably wouldn't make you defensive. And I would have made sure that I had laid the groundwork for our relationship, that the client would feel comfortable when asked these questions. So while sometimes these may seem insensitive, it is very much about the core conditions from Rogers that help you to be able to ask these questions in a really empathic way. Okay, remember earlier when I talked about those exiled emotions? That can help you to understand unfinished business. We all have unfinished business. It's stuff we haven't really dealt with. It's the lingering feelings we've pushed way down, like hate and rage and pain and fear and shame, grief. And they're in the background. They're there, but they're in the background. And so unless we deal with them, they will come up in unexpressed emotions that will come out at some point. And they manifest in self-defeating behaviors and other things that keep us from achieving our full awareness. Those emotions can become figural. Go back and remember figure formation and organismic self-regulation. Think about those. It became figural, it came to the forefront, the figure that we need to deal with in our person-centered awareness and effective in that moment. So those nagging emotions become an undercurrent. And eventually they will come to the forefront. As a Gestalt therapist, you would encourage them to express their feelings directly, like they've never expressed them before. Designing experiments that we will talk about later in this lecture that are fantastic. I think some of you use those for the rest of your career. There's some great group activities in here. And I think really can go deep when you use these type of activities. Psychodrama came out of all of this too. Contact and disturbances to contact. We talked about contact in the beginning of the lecture. It's that fully interacting with nature and other people without losing your sense of self. Miriam Polster says it's continually renewed creative adjustment of individuals to their environment. Good contact involves awareness, a sense of energy, and the ability to express oneself. It also ebbs and flows. There are many disturbances to contact that prevent us from being fully in the present, fully experiencing our environment in the way that we should. There are 5 of them: introjection, projection, retroflexion, confluence, and deflection. So let's just talk about those 5 ways that our contact can be disturbed. Let's start with introjection. If you want to think about interjection, it's basically just taking everything in without really stopping to analyze or evaluate it. Just interjects coming in and we're passively accepting them. And in group, you would think about this happening in the beginning stages when people are too fearful to disagree with the group leader or just express their upsetting feelings about someone else in the group. It would be too soon. And so interjects are coming in and everyone's just swallowing them without. Um, Projection is the opposite of introjection. It's basically the same thing as transference. There are aspects of our personality that maybe we're unaware of, and we transfer that onto others by seeing it in others, just in parts of ourselves that we don't agree with or align with our view of ourselves. Then we put that on another person when we see that in them and we transfer it onto them. That's projection, just kind of like it sounds. And then we have retroflexion, which is the next. If you think of retroflexion, it's almost the opposite of projection. You're retroactively projecting onto self. So you're internalizing everything and being really aggressive on the inside of you. You're holding back and hurting yourself, expressing very little emotion. The goal of this is to help you self-regulate and understand that you're doing that and get you a voice. Often clients come in and I realize they have no voice, and that's often retroflexion. I don't call it that, but it's the same thing, and I help them find a voice. It really does hurt us when we don't have a voice. We don't have our boundaries. Back to that boundary work. Confluence is blurring of awareness between the self and the environment. Now, again, blurred boundaries. There's no clear line or boundary between what we're experiencing inside of us and what's outside of us. This is the people pleaser. This is the person who wants to be accepted and completely liked, and it's difficult for them to have an individuation of self. Oh, and deflection. Okay, we're going to deflect, right? We use that word a lot. Um, Diffuse contact through overuse of humor, abstract generalizations, and questions rather than statements. Nobody get defensive, but we see this happen in class a lot. And I talk about that, and it's normal for us to deflect when we get deep or get close to something. I even do it sometimes. I do it on purpose sometimes in class, and you guys don't know it, so that I get us not to go somewhere that I don't want someone to go because it's maybe not appropriate for class. So, I think this is something we all use, but if you use it all the time and you don't use it appropriately, then it can be hurtful to you and to others. So these are the styles of contact. They can be healthy or unhealthy depending on the group member's level of awareness. Okay, let's see what we got next. That time where I start talking to myself. All right, we're going into energy. Talking about energy and then blocks to energy. Energy is like your milieu, your environment. What is the energy of your group? What is going on in there? What's the feel, right? And you want that energy to be good and you want it to be flowing and not blocked. You can see this in the behavior and the feelings in the bodies of the clients. Your own body being blocked in a certain area, people's nonverbal behavior, fast voice or twitching legs. And you could go into that. You could actually do activities to help people unblock energy and help them pay attention to how they're feeling in their bodies. We store our emotions in our bodies. The Gestalt theory was way before its time in knowing that. And that's a big part of EMDR and a lot of other therapy. But because of the dorsal vagus nerve, we store our emotional energy below in our bodies. And so it's neat that so long ago they had an awareness of that. The reference in the book is, 1978. So a year after I was 1 year old then. So that's how I'll know if you watch this, if you knew that I said that. How about that? Okay. And we have these blocks to energy, and you're not aware of the energy or where it's located. I did therapy a few weeks ago with a client, who was sexually abused by her grandfather, and she's had this. When we started doing the work, she's had this horrible pain in her stomach, and has had some issues there. And when we started working on it, she was in intense pain, and I had her focus on that and just focus, and bilaterally stimulate with the tappers. She was aware of it and had trouble for the whole week. We were in the middle of the memory, and then when we came back and finished the memory, I desensitized it, and when we unblocked it, that part of her body healed. So it's part of it is just awareness, and then figuring out why, and figuring out how to unblock that area and bring awareness and attention and love and nurturing to that area. Okie dokie. The roles and functions of the group leader. Oh, by the way, I did that online, guys. So mental health, pretty cool. Doing some real cool stuff online right now. You can also say that. So I know that you watched this video that I'm making myself do right now. All right. As a leader, this is what you want to know, right? What do I do as a Gestalt? So Gestalt group leaders today would be empathic and genuine and authentic, etc. But one of the big parts of your disclosure, you disclose what you're experiencing in the here and now as a group leader. You do not self-disclose about yourself personally, but you talk about what you are seeing and feeling in the group, your personal reaction to what you're observing. It's very helpful for group members to see this through your eyes, and it leads the group in the way that it needs to go. It also makes it a more authentic environment. The text talks about the group therapist like an artist. The artist invents experiments with clients to augment their range of behaviors. You're creating an atmosphere and a structure in which the group's own creativity and inventiveness can emerge. You employ a wide range of interventions. This is an opposite thing from person-centered, which is not intervention heavy, which is my big issue with it. I already said this, that relationship now has a very important role. And there is a strong dialogue relationship. Emphasis is on presence, authentic dialogue, gentleness, and direct self-expression by the leader. There are stages of a Gestalt group, much like you would understand from the stages of group. The first stage of the group is that the group is very dependent on the leader, and they are looking to the leader for direction. We're trying to create that climate of trust and a good environment so that the clients can start to feel open and comfortable to start taking risks in counseling. Second stage is where more you're trying to form. Like you're supposed to get that group norm into a good place, and you're trying to influence counterdependence on the group members where they are supporting and encouraging one another, but they're also beginning to open up and talk about things they're not happy with, and voicing their real opinion of what's going on. And of course, the third stage is really that strong stage where we're working, we have an intimate, interdependent relationship. And you see this happen a lot of times in our group classes, even with ours, even though we got cut short. You start to see that group really relying on one another and supporting each other. And it does stick. It seems to stick throughout the rest of the program. It's really interesting. You work through influence, power, authority, and now you work on a much deeper level. And those experiments change. So the experiments that we go through, and we'll talk about in a minute, can go much more deeply into each of the clients' lives, and it's safe. So how do we do those experiments? Which is really just the same. Okay, experiments are the same thing as interventions or techniques or group activities. I know those words are used interchangeably, and please don't get confused, but they are called experiments in Gestalt. So if on your NCE test or something like that, you see that, then that's what it is. That could be a question. You prepare the clients for experiments, and they have all sorts of different types of experiments. And they are as follows: rehearsal, the exaggeration technique, making the rounds, fantasy, dialogue experiments, and more. So let's just go through one by one so you can start to learn what they are. Just kidding, I made a mistake. And in these things, I don't exactly know how to fix that, except I'm just going to tell you I just made a mistake. I am correct in that these words can be used interchangeably in other theories, but in Gestalt, and this is where my brain was remembering some of this, techniques and experiments are not synonymous. okay? But they can be in other theories, which is what is so confusing. I remember there was something confusing about this. But techniques are exercises or procedures that are often used to bring about action or interaction with a prescribed outcome in mind. They are not invented in the moment, but they're a part of the group environment. So they're basically activities that we're doing as part of the group. But experiments are more subjectively or phenomenologically based. They come out of what is occurring within the moment, and the outcome is unknown. It's a method that shifts from the focus of counseling from talking about it to an activity that will heighten awareness. For instance, it may be something we didn't have planned, but all of a sudden someone's talking about some issues they have with their mother, and we pull a chair out. Or we do something that we just weren't planning. It's coming out of the group, or we come up with something spontaneous that we think would be helpful that was not planned as part of our group. So hopefully that helps a little bit, and I definitely wanted to make sure I said that and not to confuse you guys, because that's what's difficult about doing these lectures without being in front of you, isn't it? Okay, now let's do rehearsal. All right. Rehearsal is when you think about in everyday life, we may rehearse for roles, and we worry we may not say something right or perform properly. Internal rehearsing consumes much energy and frequently inhibits spontaneity. By participating in a rehearsal, members say out loud what they're thinking silently. This can be helpful when it is obvious that members are doing blocking and censoring. You have to be careful when you do a rehearsal. It has to be timed properly, and it must come from a situation in which a member is struggling in some way, hence the experiment. They're not designed to stir up emotions, but bring sharp awareness into the present for the client. For example, during the initial stages of one of my groups, which if this is the textbook, Erin was quite silent and appeared to be developing an observer stance. When I asked her if she was indeed saying everything she wanted to say, she shook her head in denial. So I asked her to express aloud some of the random thoughts she had as she was sitting there in silence. This can be very productive. Assume Klaus wants to tell his boss he doesn't feel appreciated, and he wants to be recognized for his accomplishments. Klaus can picture himself standing before his boss, ready to tell him what he wants to say in an out loud rehearsal. This is the same thing as a role play, really, if you think about it. So maybe that's helpful when you think about it. The next thing I want to talk about is the exaggeration technique. The exaggeration technique is just like it sounds. For example, in a group, the way you would use this is if you notice that Sandy constantly nods her head in an approving way, the leader asks Sandy to go before each group member and intentionally exaggerate nodding her head while at the same time putting words with this action. Other examples of behaviors that lend themselves to exaggeration are habitually smiling while talking about something negative, which is affect intolerance, trembling, clenching fist, tapping foot, crossing arms, pointing a finger. So there's another example here. Baron, a group member, said, I feel burdened by listening to everyone's problems in this group. At an earlier session, Stephen had confronted Baron for intervening so quickly and trying to make him feel better when he was working on conflicts he was having with his family. She then revealed that during her childhood years, she typically assumed the role of family arbitrator, always doing her best to smooth over battles in the family. Baron eventually said that she was sick and tired of carrying everyone's burdens. It weighed her down and made her feel heavy. And then the leader suggested Baron pick up heavy objects and hold them as she looked at each person in the group. She can be invited to allow herself to get into the experience. For example, while holding them, she might say, looking at you, I am burdened by blank. Or she might say something to each member such as, here, let me take on your burdens. I really enjoy carrying everyone's problems. And notice how much it weighs her down. So this is a really interesting one that could be used really effectively in real time. Making the rounds is what it sounds like, making the rounds. Making the rounds has several examples here of how you could utilize it. For example, Julia says that he is afraid of women. He could make the rounds and say to each woman, I'm afraid of you because blank, I'm afraid of you because blank. Or if I were to get close to you, blank, if I were to get close to you, blank. Adriana worries about boring people in group. She might be asked to make the rounds and for each person complete the sentence. One way I could bore you is by blank. One way I could bore you is by blank. So you make those rounds. The next one is fantasy. Fantasy approaches can be used when members are too threatened to deal with a problem. So this is where we can promote personal awareness by helping them to create this in a fantasy world. Fantasy approaches are useful in dealing with negative expectations. Members who are afraid to express what they think and feel to someone they love can be guided through a fantasy situation in which they say everything they want to but are afraid to express, similar to the role play. It is a safe way for people to explore in group. And then we have dialogue experiments. A dialogue experiment may be you carrying on a conversation with two parts of your personality, with a younger part of yourself, or with the masculine and feminine part of your personality. There's a lot of different ways you can utilize this activity. And there are more experiments. Getting you talk, questions, qualifiers, disclaimers, can't statements, shoulds, oughts, nonverbals. These are all really great activities that you can use with your clients if you are a Gestalt leader. And some of you may want to use some of this when we're doing our own group in class because they can be really, really interesting and easy to do and cause us to go a little bit deeper. So the it and you talk. It talk is a way of depersonalizing our language. By using it instead of I, we maintain distance from our experience. It. Asking clients to change sentences will be helpful for you in individual therapy and in group. Substituting personal pronouns for impersonal ones can really assume responsibility for what you say. You is the other one. You feel hurt when someone rejects you. By using you talk, people detach from whatever they may be feeling. Ask members to pay attention to the difference between this you statement and saying, I feel hurt. I feel, I want, I need statements. That's what I always talk about with communication with clients. In Gestalt group, members are discouraged from asking questions. Questions direct attention to other people and easily put others on the defense. Questions often demand those being questioned reveal themselves, whereas those who ask are safe. Ones who ask too many questions can be asked to experiment with any of the following. Instead of asking a question, make a direct statement to the person and share your own motivation for the question. That's the way you flip that question. So if someone asks a question, say, instead of asking that question, tell me what's your motivation for asking it as a group leader. Look at them and tell them why did you get. What is the motivation behind the question? How and what instead of why. We talked about that already. And the I statements. Qualifiers and disclaimers. People qualify things. An example is the use of but. I like but. Often to feel depressed, but. I think this group is helping me, but. So in these cases, the word but, it discounts everything. Without hurting group members, you can encourage them to explore the impact of the qualifier and disclaimer. I can't just means I won't. This is also CBT. I simply can't talk to my father and tell him what I feel, and he would never understand me. So you're saying you won't. She's unwilling to do it, right? She won't. Increase to substitute can't for won't. Can be really helpful and powerful in changing behavior. Same with should not, same thing, should not, should and ought. I ought to, and if I don't, I feel terrible. The list of should-isms, both in daily life and in group, is endless. Members can at least become aware of their frequency of should-nots and instead change to I have to or I should to I choose to. I choose to. So changing phrases such as I have to or I should to I choose to. This is a CBT technique. Nonverbal language is extremely important. We've already talked about it. Tone, pitch, volume, shaking, smiling. Bring attention to it as the group leader. It can really cause to have a powerful group. Dream work is important in Gestalt. You interpret the dreams. talk about the dreams. You do not interpret. I'm sorry, you do not interpret, but you talk about them. And what is the message to the member, right? Go back, bring it back to them. You can ask the members to relive the dreams as if they're happening now. What interests them about the dream? What are different parts of the dream? Act out the dream, etc. Gestalt can be used in schools, so they can often bridge activities can bridge to the child's inner self. It is a theoretically based approach that's conducive to brief interventions in school. It could be hard in an adolescent group, it's a limitation. And multiculturally, Gestalt therapists attend to what is figural for members out of their diverse backgrounds. Creative experiments can be devised that are meaningful to clients who express themselves nonverbally. It can be off-putting depending on your cultural background, Gestalt, and definitely could not be inappropriate for clients who've been oppressed. There's a lot of contributions of this. The role in authentic relationships and dialogue and therapy are really important in the nonverbals. The here and now, the field theory, phenomenology, creativity, and spontaneity. Limitations. Some leaders may pay little attention to cognitive factors. Power could be misused to the active role of the leader. And emotionally provocative interventions could be used without adequate processing afterwards, for sure, especially with complex trauma. The end. I did it. 35 minutes, well, 36.